It's entitled Realizing Efficiency and Interoperability in the BMA, Operational Level Initiatives Supporting the SOA and Semantic Technology Strategy. We have three speakers joining us today. To my far right is Ms. Didi Akio, Senior Enterprise Architect at the DCMO. Didi was the Department of Defense Business Enterprise Architecture Chief Architect for the Business Transformation Agency, where she was responsible for planning, development, and maintenance of the BEA, which conveys the DoD's enterprise-level business priorities, capabilities, standards, and requirements to meet emerging leadership objectives and stakeholder requirements for business transformation. Supporting the BEA development effort, she was also responsible for the architecture development methodology, configuration management, quality management, architecture visualization, and early drafts of the Architecture Federation concepts. To my right is Eric Rietort, Senior Enterprise. Eric actually just got a new role over at the at DISA. Eric is now the Principal Enterprise Architect at the Defense Information Systems Agency's Strategic Planning and Information Directorate. There, he focuses on integrating enterprise solutions to meet mission and use requirements. He currently is focusing on delivering cloud computing in the gig to provide on-demand and surge capabilities to the warfighter. To my left, we have Jonathan Underley, who is a Program Manager, Enterprise Information Web at the DCMO within DoD. With 18 years of experience applying technology solutions to business problems, Jonathan has worked on enterprise solutions for some of the world's largest organizations, including the Department of Veterans Affairs and the DoD. The solutions have spanned case management, ERPs, EA, enterprise data, and enterprise integration. His most recent work has been applying semantic technology to business intelligence and analytics to improve information visibility and business performance. And with that, I believe Eric is going to kick it off with a few comments. Thank you.
Well, ladies and gentlemen, thank us for having us here today. As Para mentioned, I'm no longer with the Business Transformation Agency, or DCMO. Although this is part of my extended family, Jonathan and Didi and I have been working together with Mr. Wisnowski, who's sitting up here on this semantic journey for quite some time, and we started it maybe 5 years ago. We're looking at service-oriented architecture, and as technology evolved, we decided that we had to get a grasp of the data, and that's why we believe in semantic technology, ALN-RDF. Now, as Parham noted, I'm working on cloud computing now for DoD and looking at what we want to provide to the enterprise from DISA to the warfighter. And our concept of cloud computing includes data as a service. And so we believe that data as a service required certain standards to be in place for you to be able to access that data. And we're hoping the use of ontologies and RDF and OWL and the sort of demonstration we're going to get from Jonathan will show that. But this journey has been long, and it's really been quite exploratory. And what we ended up doing, first we had published the Federation Strategy and Roadmap that said, where do we want to go from a service-oriented architecture perspective? Following that, last year, working with Didi and Jonathan, we took a re-look at where we needed to go within the Department for Business Operations, especially given that the Secretary of Defense had announced a reorganization, cost-cutting measures being put in place. As everybody is aware, BTA is being promoted, and the components that Didi and Jonathan represent are moving into the Deputy Chief Management Office. And so we took a look at what we wanted to do and how we had to change the business enterprise architecture, documented it with a plan, a long-range plan that said one of the things we need to do is training and outreach, change the way that we do compliance to the business enterprise architecture, and start getting programs to put in place exchanges, interface exchanges that were documented as actually being machine understandable and usable exchanges, basically ALN-RDF. So what we're going to do today is Didi's going to come up and talk with us a little while about what we're doing on the business enterprise architecture side, what we're doing to equip the workforce, and the guidance that we put in place from the DCMO perspective. And then Jonathan's going to give us a demonstration of the actual capability, the enterprise information web that we expect to exist and be created throughout the department on the business operations side. And then we'll we'll have a little bit of computer changeover to give the demonstration. We're going to have to take this one out. And then we'll do a panel discussion, and you can ask questions about what our journey has been like. So, Ms. Akeo, Didi, this is the Semantic BEA Roadmap, and she'll speak on that. Thank you.
Thank you, Eric, and good morning, everyone. As Eric pointed out, and I'm sure many of you heard Dennis's keynote yesterday, a lot of what we're doing right now is actually coming up with how do we execute this semantic technology journey that we've embarked on. Jonathan and his demonstration will actually show you from the actual solution architecture perspective how all of this can and should work. What we're doing right now is backfitting, if you will, the business enterprise architecture so that as we move forward, we will together be integrated and or federated using the semantic technologies and the standards that you've heard so much about. This roadmap right here is actually about a 2-year plan, and we expect that we will continue to evolve it. There's a lot of milestones on there, as you can see there. But what we started out with is just your regular system architect, enterprise architecture, relational database foundation, made changes to our meta model, a lot of user prop changes, and now as we transition into an ontology, we actually have a head start because you have a relational database, it's much easier in some respects to actually convert that data into an ontology, and we've already done that. It's hard for me, and I don't have a clicker here, but believe me that one of those triangles up there indicates that we have a baseline ontology, BEA ontology, and that was delivered last week, Friday, I believe the 13th. We have a baseline ontology that we will continue to evolve and optimize, as you will, as we start to figure out what it is we need to support going forward. We have up to this point always known that we've needed to support portfolio management. That is part of the National Defense Authorization Act of 2005 that established that you must have an enterprise architecture, and it would support investment decisions or guide and constrain investment decisions. So we have that foundation, but we want to be able to be a little more optimized so that we can be flexible. That's what semantics brings you, and it's hard work getting there, but it provides you that flexibility and agility. And so going through this journey, we will identify other updates that we must make into the ontology so that we continue to answer or use architecture to answer those tough questions. So the top lane in this roadmap kind of lays out from an ontology perspective what it is we need to do to the BEA, to the business enterprise architecture. The second lane there identifies the tools and the technical capabilities that we must review, analyze, because obviously we have technical tools today that we use. Will it still be effective in where we're trying to go? Do we need to purchase additional tools? Do we have tools other places within the Business Transformation Agency or DCMO or even DISA that we can leverage? So we'll be doing that assessment in that second lane on what is it that we need to have in place in order to support what we're trying to do at the functional or operational BEA level in that top lane. The third lane, very, very important, is training. This is relatively new for a lot of folks, including some of the folks on the Business Enterprise Architecture team that I've led for some time now. So we need to make sure that not only they get trained up on where we're trying to go, why we're going there, how do we do this, but also training the entire department. I mean, everyone needs to understand why it is we're going in this route, what are the benefits, and they all need to have a fundamental understanding of this journey that we're on, because they all somehow, some way contribute into this journey. As far as functional owners, it's them, they're the business owners that we need to support, so they're our partners in developing and identifying what do these ontologies need to include, right? Senior decision makers, they provide us the vision from the strategic management plan down through priorities and objectives that get built into the architecture. So everyone that has anything to do with decision making going forward in the Department of Defense, we're expecting that they will get trained in this. That's that third lane. And so we're developing right now an in-house training curriculum that we're putting together. Some of you might have seen some of the flyers laying around. I saw some folks that had it. There are some links that you can actually go out there and take a look at what we've put together to date. As well, the very last lane, governance. It was a big discussion topic in Dennis's speech. You can do all these, and at a tactical level, it's great. You can develop tools, you can develop ontologies, but you got to be able to govern it. And so what we've put together there, right now, we've actually developed this technical transition plan that Eric was talking about earlier. That's kind of our vision for where we want to go. There's been 2 DoD instructions that have been developed and are sitting up with our senior leaders right now for approval before it gets staffed through the department, but it lays out the requirement to move for the department, at least in the business mission area, to move forward with regard to you will use OWL RDF semantic technologies that we're laying out, these open standards that we're identifying. You will use the business process modeling notation, conformance class 2.0 for process modeling. And as we identify other standards that we believe are needed in order to achieve our vision, there will be instructions and policy that go along with that. So with that, I want to give the most time to Jonathan so you can see some of the great things that they've done in the Enterprise Information Web, and then we'll answer any questions after that. So we're going to do a swap out? Okay.
Of course, we have a lot of vendor and contractor partners. Ted Tambernino has been with us at the BTA for as long as I've been there, and he's a critical part of what's been going on for the Enterprise Information Web. He'll be helping us do the demonstration today.
So just a few comments to kind of transition us. My involvement in EIW came about after the Dimers program. I don't know how many people are familiar with that, but it was a PeopleSoft implementation, and the vision was to take all of the uniformed military and have a single instance for HR, personnel, and pay. The implementation itself didn't really go as planned, and about a year and a half ago, the Deputy Secretary of Defense made a decision that the individual services, the Army, Marine Corps, Navy, Air Force, would implement their own per-pay solutions. And on top of that, he also directed that a warehouse be put in place to basically give information visibility across these disparate kind of implementations. So we looked at the problem for a while, and we decided that we already had a warehouse at Defense Manpower Data Center out in California, and each of the services would be probably standing up their own personnel warehouses to go along with their implementations. So we didn't think the implementation of an additional warehouse was really the right answer. The Dimers program in general had a lot of problems with interfaces, understanding the context as you went across one different domain to another, and resolving those contexts so that you could actually have the systems interface appropriately and exchange not only data but information that was useful. So as I was investigating this interface problem, it really came down to vocabulary. You ready for the demo? Oh, all right. So, which is kind of what led us into semantics in general, resolving the differences in vocabulary. And so the approach we're taking is we describe not only the vocabulary, but also the standards. So we start with the standards that DoD issues for personnel and pay, everything from the information standards that are required. So we kind of codify the laws, regulations, and policy into things like the HRM, Human Resource Management, information architecture, and within it, it has standards. Specifically, we focused on something called the CRIS, the Common HR Information Standards. So those really tell you the business rules, the information, and to some extent some process information on really what the laws, regulations, and policies require when you're executing this personal pay business. So we started with that, and we created semantic models of it. So we actually took these standards and created unambiguous descriptions using OWL, Web Ontology Language, and RDF, Resource Description Framework, which are two standards from the W3C, the same people that brought you URLs, URIs, IP addressing to a certain extent, HTML, XML. So this is really the next layer of standards on top of kind of like a Web 3.0 layer cake. So once we created these models, we went and then described the underlying processes. And this is kind of where we start collaborating with not only the policy owners, but also the services. When I say services, no, I'm not talking service-oriented architecture. I'm talking Marine Corps, et cetera. And we actually started with the Marine Corps. And so we would model out the standards and then how the individual services were executing their business. And then, once we did that, we described the authoritative data source that they were using when executing those processes. So now we have traceability all the way from policy down to running system, all documented in a semantic model that now is queryable. Queryable not only for analytics, so we can determine what the capabilities of our system are, or our environment, but we can also get all the way down to instance data for aggregation and actually analytics. And with that, so what you're going to see today is the outcome of our efforts. This is actually running on servers out at an Army data center. And what we have here is all scrubbed data, so no, our troops are not an average age of 60, and so the demographic information that you see today is not really representative of our force. So the top part, the actual UI you're seeing, the user interface, is all built on something called Open Social. So if you're familiar with Google Gadgets, this is the same framework that they use. So all of our graphics now kind of just inherit all the capability of that particular framework. So we can do pie charts and bar charts and 3D, and we can add it to your web page if you so desire. So what you're seeing in the upper left-hand corner there is a federated query. So we have here federated information from the Army and the Marine Corps for pay grade. So that seems pretty straightforward, but if you were to go down into the underlying data sources, they actually have slightly different representations. So what we've done here is we're actually not moving the data from where it lives and breathes. We are doing virtualized queries. So we're actually pulling together the information on the fly, resolving it to an enterprise concept, and then giving you the aggregation. So you want to go ahead and blow that out? So the representation you see, so this particular page is all query driven. So when I say query driven, we didn't actually have somebody coding HTML to create the views. So if I were to go into, let me see, let's go to one of our mapping areas. So R2RML is actually a mapping standard. Can you guys hear me okay if I'm not leaning into the mic? This is sort of annoying me.
Need the mic, John.
I do need the mic? All right. Okay, so R2RML is another standard that is about to be issued by the W3C. The working group has finalized it. They have just not published it yet. And this is a standard way to map ontologies to relational data sources. So in this instance, we've actually taken the concepts from our ontology. So again, we started out with the enterprise standards that PNR, Personnel and Readiness, publishes. So that's the policy regulations and instructions that then get codified into this ontology. And now we're mapping underlying systems using this open language to the relational sources underneath. So essentially, it gives us now an open way to represent our business. So normally in an ETL process or even in an interface, if you're translating the context or information from one system to another context, that business logic is locked away in either Java or in SQL itself, or it could be in C, C++, or if you're using other vendors, it could be in any vendor's proprietary language for describing what they do when they're extracting information from a system to put it into another format. So now all of our mappings are in an open standard, so you can basically take out any of the layers of our architecture as more and more software components or hardware components become available to plug into the architecture. So we've eliminated vendor lock-in in this case by having all of our information really documented in open standards. And it's also a queryable architecture. So again, the view that we were just seeing was query-driven. We've actually said, for this graphic on the left, show me the mappings to the underlying systems. Again, that's not hand-coded, it's just all query-driven. And when I say query-driven, there is a standard, something called Sparkle. It's the analog in the semantic world for SQL in a relational world. So these are all Sparkle queries that are just essentially querying our information model to extract views. And these views can again be dashboards that give you visibility into how your business is operating. You can actually aggregate metrics. We did one in here. I'll get to dwell time in a minute. Go all the way down to the bottom. So here you're seeing the representation for the underlying Marine Corps data source and the Army data source, and then all the mappings. So the power of this is really in that it's visible. We've collaborated with the system owners and the policy owners to come up with that understanding and then mapping. And if we wanted to, we can go back in, expose the mappings, and validate them. So if someone says, well, you know, you really got the understanding wrong of my information, you don't understand the context, so we can say, really, show me where we got it wrong. We've documented all of this in a collaborative fashion, in a wiki, actually. So we can go back and kind of document why we did the mapping certain ways, why we decided to represent concepts the way we did. So that way, and it's all, you know, it can be changed on the fly and then requeried. All right, so the last thing, let's go to the process. So the process model that you're seeing here, again, BPMN, primitives compliant. I'm sure Dennis talked about that a bit. And this is showing you the processes that are related to generating the information and the graphic on the left. You also can see all the performers, the business rules, the information requirements that are required when executing that process. So where you see race, person, etc. there, those are all concepts in the ontology that were codified from policy. So I think these are actually Chris's. And I can actually look at my P&R expert sitting in the front row and say, those are Chris's, right? We did. That was the Common Human Resource Information Standard. Okay, so next tab. This shows you the traceability to policy, and then the final one is the gap. So when we do information review boards today, and when we do compliance with the enterprise architecture, we basically are taking the documentation as face value. So we go through checklists and we say, are you compliant with the architecture, yes or no? Everybody reads the architecture, they compare it to their system, and they say yes or no. So what we've done is, almost as a byproduct of doing this mapping description work, we can now query our architecture and find out where our gaps are compared to our standards and our underlying systems. So what you're seeing here is a representation. We have a superset where it says domain values that shows you all of the domain values for, what did we choose?
Ethnic group.
Ethnic group. This shows you the ethnic groups that are allowed by policy and whether or not the underlying systems actually are using that value. And so where you see a red X are all the values that are not allowed by policy. Or if you see them in the CRIS column, which is the standards column, standards have not been identified for that particular one. So I believe Arab is not an allowed value for ethnic group based on our current standards. However, you do see a system over there that is using that. So this can now be applied to really any of the standards that you have within the architecture to do process comparison, data value comparison, and start getting down to actually fact-based portfolio analysis. Okay, I think we have about 15 minutes left, so let me show you one last view. The last one I want to show is something called dwell time. Within the strategic management plan that DoD publishes, one of the metrics that they track is dwell time. So when we were asked, asked to expose this metric through the semantic framework that we have, or the semantic capability, what we actually did was reuse mappings that we had from the Marine Corps. So all we had to do was describe the metric, define what it meant, and we reused the underlying descriptions and mappings we had to surface this metric. So from here, we have traceability from the department's top-level goals, now all the way down through processes and standards to underlying systems, and we can see how we're performing.
Yeah, and I want to point out something. Before, this process was manual. This data was gathered through email, being sent out. Somebody looks at the data, massages it, rolls it up, and sends it to us to tell us where we are on a quarterly basis. And now what you're looking at is a direct implementation from policy, pulling data from the actual authoritative sources back out using standards that were developed in the DoD space and now are owned in the public. So this is, for us, game-changing.
Okay, any questions? We start our panel discussion now.
Jonathan, one of the difficulties I've found in some enterprise architecture work is to actually identify the authoritative source, or to get the different agencies to agree when they have ad hoc choices of which ones to use. Could you comment on what obstacles you found and how you overcome them?
Sure. Part and parcel of what we're doing is really the collaboration. I said before that when we do the process collaboration work, when we actually go through and we say, okay, we take slices of the business, we don't take the whole elephant at once, and we actually have the policy owners there with us and the services, and we say, for this slice of the business, for this process, how are you executing it, and what is your authoritative source for that information that the standards are requiring? So the services themselves are in the room with us saying, for person, for instance, or for pay grade, this is the authoritative source that you should go to when doing analytics against it. So we're building that kind of repository of authoritative data sources and mappings as we go.
Yes.
From an operational perspective, is it envisioned that this tool could possibly be used for location of resources to support a surge and deployment of forces at a later date?
Well, location gets into some sensitive issues from a classification perspective, but the methodology and approach itself could absolutely be applied. So it's just, it's just a different source of data, really.
And I understand that classified versus unclassified. I was just curious.
Yeah, actually, in one of our earlier pods, we had a graphic or a dashboard that allowed you to drill in to demographic information, essentially, and see within a theater of operation where your current resources are distributed by combatant commander. Can't pinpoint exactly where they are, but
Yes.
Right.
you'd know where they were assigned.
What's business plan to support this?
It's a good question. So the policy currently written by DCMO applies to the entire Department of Defense for all business programs. So really the onus here is on the programs when they go through their architecture process that they already do. They're creating DoD compliant products, describing their programs. They need to comply with this policy, which means they will be building ontologies, information models based on ALAN RDF. So from a DoD standpoint, it really isn't necessarily that DISA needs to build something new. What needs to happen is that the programs need to present their information, logical data models, using the standards OWL and RDF. Now, we currently are looking at what the requirements are for data as a service. And those sorts of things would fall in line to support data, mediation, caching, backup, and whatnot. But this really is the programs that represent the authoritative data sources that need to provide that information. Yes, sir.
Hi. I've been dabbling with semantics and tools available to me such as Protege. And I found this is really an extremely complex subject. I once tried suggesting using ontology to describe weather to a room full of meteorologists. And the reaction I got was absolutely amazing.
Yeah.
Negatively. So how do you basically work with the business people who you're trying to get the information, trying to get them in line, and because you can't talk semantics to them, you can't talk ontology to them?
So we lay out basically what our goals are, but we have ontologists that really have a discussion with the subject matter experts, and then they're the ones who create the ontologies, and then we have even another layer below that where we have ontology engineers, if you will, because we have engineered artifacts. They're not just kind of words with definitions. They're actually breaking up these concepts into classes and subclasses with properties, and I mean, they're engineered artifacts, if you will. And so when we collaborate with the subject matter experts, it's a conversation. So they may or may not even know that we're breaking down their information into such a low level of detail that hopefully will be computer operatable and machine readable.
I think, Dee Dee, you had this issue with your team, right, in the business enterprise architecture, and
Definitely. Anyone who's been working in the enterprise architecture field, we got the scars to show it, right? You say the A word and you get that same look. So now we're saying the O word and you get the same look. Right. But one of the things we are looking at least Eric, when he was still with us, was working on an initiative that was looking at the concept of controlled natural language to help to build the ontologies, which is more English-like, that is more palatable, if you will, to many of the business folks, because it's in that triples type of format, right, in which they can understand. It's at a very atomic level, obviously, but at least they're reading it in English instead of when you start showing them these ontology views, it's a little harder for them to grasp. But that was another area that we're also considering is controlled natural language, and how that might, from a visual perspective, when you're talking to the business folks, maybe that's more of an amenable view to share with them than the technical parts of a graph, perhaps. But yeah, it's still definitely a challenge.
And I think another aspect is, Mr. Wisnowski, we decided not to use the word ontology. We use common vocabularies, building common vocabularies, because everybody seems to understand that, rather than have to describe what an ontology is. And you get people go to Wikipedia and they'll look at it and it won't describe anything that has to do with the technology. So, yes.
Just a comment. We're doing weather, so I'll be happy to share it with you.
So I think we have time for just a few more questions. I would like to say something about the controlled natural language. It is possible, basically, to teach people and get agreement on a sentence like, a cat has kittens. And so controlled natural language is breaking down the ontology into that level of statements. So you don't have to teach somebody how to use a tool like Protege, which requires a lot of training, as you have found out. But you just have to get agreement on basic definitional statements, and then those get parsed into OWL or whatever version of what you want to see your vocabulary in. And if it required to do some additional work in Protégé, then you can have your ontologists do that. But there is a real difference between agreeing on those definitional statements and then doing what Jonathan was talking about further on to create these mapping ontologies that allow you to pull down from relational databases. And so to do the second part, you definitely need your engineering team and your programmers to do that. But we do this anyhow, right? In your weather piece, you have to get people to agree on things. We got a unit of measure working group, and we have to agree how to describe a location. And the C2 community, the warfighting community, has one way of describing it, and they say they're authoritative for it. And then you'll have the business community will say, well, we're authoritative for it because we need to account for that asset, right, where the address is. And you can put people in a room together, and they can argue about this for a year and still not come up with an agreement about what it is. The beauty of this approach is, first, that whenever you build an architecture that we have to do anyhow, you're describing what you have. The second is reuse. You can reuse these things because they're based on a standard. So if you want, for instance, to describe something that needs to use country, you can get an ontology that exists today, go online, use a semantic web browser, this one called Swoogle, and you'll find an ontology that will have the country code definitions based on ISO, and it's there for you, and all you do is you take it in and reuse it. So all these artifacts that are being built, these ontologies that are being built at 3IW, they are reusable. So you end up only having to build out that incremental portion that doesn't exist to describe your domain, rather than having to start from scratch each time or spend a year trying to figure out how do we agree on whether a cat has kittens or and a dog has puppies.
Right, and along with those lines, in that second lane, if you will, we kind of talked about tools. One of the things we're working on is as we start to build these ontologies, what is that environment, what is that infrastructure that we need to put in place to include configuration management? How do you manage these ontologies, allowing it to be accessible, reused, as we start to move forward? So that's definitely in that second lane that we're considering as well, is that what we're calling ontology development or usability strategy, ontology management strategy for reusing these ontologies as they get built and making them accessible, visible, and reusable.
Do you have a repository?
We don't right now. That's part of what we're working on as well. That's part of it.
Part of the reusable.
That's correct.
Be able to discover it. So.
That's correct, and no disrespect to our DISA brethren, but they have a bunch of repositories and registries out there that, through lessons learned, we know what we don't want to do. So taking some of that into consideration as well, moving forward. Obviously, there's going to be a lot of people that we need to collaborate with, so that we make sure that it is as simple and reusable as possible.
So, do we have any more questions? I would encourage you, if you're interested in understanding how to do this work, to contact Jonathan or Mr. Wisnowski. As Dee had mentioned, DCMO has put together training sessions on teaching people how to do this, and I'm sure they would be amenable to having people contact them and learn from them how to execute this within your own organization.
Thank you.
Thanks.
All right, thank you very much.